in first person, and this is something I'm anxious to hear. Peggy was born and raised here in Granville County. She went to Oxford High School, and she was going to college, but she did not want to leave her husband to be here for some other woman to take him away from her. So anyway, she and Troy went off to South Carolina, got married, and after that, he put her through school, and UNC Chapel Hill is my #1 school, and that's where she went part of it. And then she went to UNCG and also to Alamance Community College. She is a retired school teacher who taught special needs children in Alamance County. And she's got a number of relatives that lives here in the county today, and a lot of you here in this room are related to her, or Troy, either one. And that's the Woodliefs, the Blackwells, the Frasers, the Elliots, and she's got a long list of them. So anyway, welcome to Granville County Genealogical Society, and we're anxious to hear your program.
I'm honored to be here. My partner in crime, Troy Johnson, has asked that I give a little introduction to this before we start into the first person. First thing I want to know is, how many people in here are related through the Jeremiah Fraser line?
I'm not sure.
Well, yeah, you are. Well, let's see. It's Jeremiah, William, Ephraim, then Elijah, Calvin, Thomas, Ben. Yeah, okay. The Blackwells. Parhams. Newtons. And this story is related to that particular branch of the camp. But the Woodliefs are here too. Yay! This little talk, this little first-person dramatization, started with 3 letters. Three letters. One of them I knew existed. I'd seen it before. But it disappeared, and we didn't know what had happened to it. Aunt Essie had Alzheimer's, but luckily someone took it and they put it in the archives, so it was saved. They didn't put it on eBay and sell it, which they could have. It has a nice, it bring pretty good money. These other 2 letters were found in a Pennsylvania map box in the closet under the steps at my Aunt Essie's house, which she had shared with her mother-in-law, Het Parham. But this is obviously Fraser. These 2 Fraser letters were in there, and in there were packages of receipts from after the war where Thomas Ben Fraser had paid his taxes, and he sewed them together. He had land taxes and school taxes, and he saved every one of them and sewed them together. Now think about why that's important, because they'd come by and say, "Oh, you didn't pay your taxes. Prove it. Can't prove it, my land." Letters are so important. Save things, people. Save them and keep them, because it connects us to the past. There are 2 men mentioned in these letters. One of them is Stephen, and one is James Spence. And James Spence, I knew nothing about him. I wasn't even sure he'd lived past 1860. But these letters connected him. When I transcribed this letter first, I transcribed Spence as sense. Okay, so I'm not good at transcription. These other letters connect to that one. And the story of a family and a family's love for one another. This takes place in northern Granville County, and part of the land that belonged to Thomas Benjamin Fraser, Elijah, and Elizabeth Blackwell Fraser, we now own that 40 acres of that farm. And every night when we are here and we go home, we travel down the road that Thomas Ben Fraser would walk down when he came home from his time in the Confederacy. My name's Elizabeth. Elizabeth Blackwell Frazier. My daddy's Pomfret Blackwell, don't you know, named after his mother's folks. I was born over there on that Blackwell's Mound. In 1820, I was 17 years old, and I came here to marry Mr. Ephraim Frazier. He was 27, and we made a good match. We built a nice life here at Sassafras Fork, and things were mostly good. Well, I say mostly good because our firstborn child, William, was born a cripple. Mama said it's because that goose with the gimp foot chased me when I was carrying him, but I don't know about that sort of thing. But mothers do. Mothers know that. But then came my other babies. There was Stephen and Harriet, Elijah Calvin, Thomas Ben, Rebecca, Mary Jane, and my baby boy, James Spence. He was born just before his daddy died in 1840. Lord, it's hard to believe I've been a widow for 23 years. This war. I never thought it would come to this. I never thought we'd come to fighting. I thought we could work it out. All North Carolina wanted was to be left alone. Why, President Davis even sent a letter to Mr. Lincoln saying, all we want is to be left alone and to remain. But then Mr. Lincoln sent a letter to our own Governor Ellis, and he said, I will have troops from North Carolina to put down the rebellion in the South. Well, Governor Ellis did not believe the truth of that letter, but he found out it was true. And so he said, you'll get no troops from North Carolina. And in 2 hot minutes, North Carolina went from being a non-secessionist state to being a secessionist state, and we seceded from that union on the 20th of May, 1861. And we became the Republic of North Carolina. Lord, all the young men were so fired up and so anxious to go out and fight, my James Spence included. So, on the 17th of May, 1861, James Spence Frazier, along with friends and his kin and people from the neighborhood, joined the 23rd North Carolina Infantry Company I. And my baby boy went to war. Well, I heard from him. He wrote me a letter. Well, he didn't exactly write the letter. His cousin, Robert Blackwell, wrote the letter. You know, all my other children could read and write and do their ciphers. But 1840 was a very hard time. And he was such a cute little boy, and he'd rather be outside playing than staying and looking at a book. But I'm sure the words are his. July the 12th, 1861. Dear Mother, I take my pen in hand to write you a few lines to let you know that I'm well at this time and very well satisfied. We are all well and is doing well and getting plenty to eat. We have sugar and coffee and rice and bacon, flour and meal. We did not go to Garysboro. We heard there was sickness there, and we stopped at Weldon, but expect to leave here soon. We has been formed in a regiment and has elected an adjutant general. I hope for a colonel soon. We has not got our arms, but we have our tents, and they are the same as little houses. We have a reading class of 6 or 7 every morning, and they puts the books in my box. I hope I may come back after a while. Bob Blackwell says he is very well satisfied, and and tell Uncle Steve, and all is well and hearty. Tell Bill and Steve they must walk over and see us some evening. We had a very good ride on the cars. The number of volunteers we've seen, we cannot tell. But we'll soon be ready for the Yankees. Cat Horns and Blacknell's companies are here with us, and a good many of our acquaintances. James Spence Frazier, R. Black. Such a good boy. Well, the next time we heard from him was August 1861. He was in this little place called Manassas, Virginia. It wasn't a happy letter. It seems he was sick in his bowels. He said they bought an old hen and stewed it up and had a good meal. You know, I'm a good mother, and I tried to send him some good food from home, but he said most of it was spoiled by the time it got there. He said the ham, the chunk of ham and the Irish potatoes made it fine, but the crackers, they were smashed to pieces. Next, he wants a pot of butter, some sweet potatoes, and a jug of brandy. And if we can see any way to get it to him, we're going to make a box and send it to him this time. Maybe it'll fare better. He hopes that soon they'll go to Washington, and he says they are big guns firing sometimes, but I don't regard them much. I don't think that's true, because he wants to come home. And he says, I close my letter by saying, I want you all to pray for me and all the rest of my friends. I am yours, respectful, J.S. Frazier. In April of 1862, they passed this law they call conscription. 2 more of my boys had to go. Elijah Calvin, well, he figured they were going to get him anyway. So he went over to Raleigh and signed up, and you know he got $50. He got a $50 bounty. And then, towards the end of May, he didn't sign up until May the 20th. No, sorry, wrong day. He didn't sign up until May 1862. End of May, he was back home on wheat furlough. Tell you, that boy could talk his way out of anything. That wheat furlough was a blessing, because he and Mary Jane have 4 little ones at home. You know, you've got to provide good food for children for them to grow up strong, and children can eat a whole bunch of biscuits. Well, Thomas Ben was not quite so thrilled to go sign up. He made them come get him and conscript him. I can't say as I blame him. He left leaving Jane and a 2-year-old baby boy, William, at home. So on July the 8th, 1862, my son, Thomas Ben Frazier, became a private in the 23rd North Carolina Infantry Company I. Now, I know there's duty, and duty calls, and you have to go and protect your family, but now they've left women and children and old ladies to run the farms and the plantations and to try to grow enough food for our families and for the soldiers. You know, Stephen's my next to the oldest boy. He always has been my right-hand man. He was 15 years old when his daddy died, and he helped me keep body and soul together. Lord of mercy, we planted every vegetable you could think, have a good stand of fruit trees, got pigs and chickens, some cows, and a good team of mules, and we grow tobacco and corn. Now the tobacco, once we cure it, we put it in a hogshead and take it up to South Boston. You know, they have a prizery up there, and we roll it up there and sell it. And the corn, I guess it's not so nice for a good Baptist lady to say, but we turned the corn into whiskey. Well, whiskey is worth more than any man's folding money these days. All my children work this place. Farming's a hard life, but it's a good life, and we haven't grown hungry yet. I hope my children will be prudent and keep this place and pass it to their children. And then in September, Stephen wrote a letter to his little brother. Dear brother, I seat myself this evening to write you a few lines to inform you that we are all well at present, and hope these lines may find you enjoying the same blessing. I received your letter in due time, which afforded us much pleasure to hear from you, but it pains us to hear that you was unwell. And I fear if the measles get hold of you, you'll see a hard time of it. I hear from you very often from other boys, and Gaston stated in his letter of the 26th that you were sick. I do hope that it will not last very long with you. Spence, I would like to know how many is in one tent, and who you and Bob is with, and tell me something about your clothes and shoes and socks, and how you make out about your bed, and if you need anything, I would like to know, and send it to you if I see any chance of it. I must say something about our crops this year. You just ought to see our corn, and be here to drink cider with me, and help me set up with the still, though I've got through most of it now. Spence, I don't know how long I'm to stay here at home. It seems like people are getting very much excited here. Bill Knott has never been home and don't talk about coming. Bill and Sid and George was fat and laughing at the others, telling them they was too sorry for the measles, but it got them at last. Spence Eakes was very sick in camp, and his pa brought him home. And now he's as fat and well as ever. As for flying around with the girls, there's little of that done. It seems the girls would like to wait for you. Duke has been hauling Becca Royster ever since the Association to Antioch. Spence, tell Bob that Aunt Betsy's uncle will preach at Mountain Creek the 3rd Sunday this month. You must write to me as soon as you get these lines. And Mother says, I'm glad to hear that you are trusting in the Lord, and say you must look to him, for he will not forsake the righteous and them that do his will. Stephen was 38. Way too old to go to war, to my way of thinking. But they would have him. And on March the 1st of 1863, he became a private in the 55th North Carolina Infantry, Company K. I got 5 boys, and I only know where 2 of them are. William, my little cripple boy, he's up to the house. And Stephen's dead. He died in Jerusalem, Virginia on June the 28th, 1863. He died of typhoid. Like so many of our boys, disease took him. I'm waiting today for Alex Newton to come and meet me and take my team of mules and flatbed wagon, and we're going to go to Weldon, and I will bring my boy home. They call me Old Lady Frazier, and they say I'm crazy. I'm crazy to be going to Weldon. It's quite a trip. But I will bring my boy home. I will bury him among his family. You know, we started this little church over to Mountain Creek back in 1860. We used to go round to Hester's, but we had to leave near about before day to get there in time for service. I like our little church. Just makes me sad there's no burying ground there. But there's a beautiful place on top of Blackwell's Mountain where other members of Stephen's family are buried. I'll bury him there. It's a pretty place. Sun hits it most every day. The only thing that really bothers me is when I'm dead and gone, will anybody remember him? And will anybody tend his grave? Y'all are most kind. I give this presentation to high school students in their junior year in language arts, and to SCD camps, and to other UDC groups and meetings. And the high school students always beat out everybody else in asking questions afterwards. So now, time for questions. Nobody wants to know what happened to Thomas Ben and Elijah Calvin?
Elijah Calvin came back.
Elijah Calvin did come back. He was wounded at Gettysburg.
He lost his arm.
But not then. Not then. He was wounded at Gettysburg, and he was wounded in the arm. And he was taken eventually to Point Lookout. But it was in '63 when they amputated his forearm in Richmond, Virginia. And he told my granddaddy they wouldn't have had to amputate, they wouldn't have had to cut off my arm, but it got live things in it. There's very little I know for sure, but that's one thing my papa said. I'll take that to the bank. Thomas Ben, he was slow to go, but when he did, he stuck it out. He also was wounded at Gettysburg, and his wound was a large flesh wound in his thigh. And it took him 2 months, that he was out of service 2 months, waiting for that to heal, but he returned. And he told my papa he got his arm blowed off at Spotsylvania Courthouse. And that's when his arm was amputated. When Thomas Ben came home, he had refused allegiance, the oath of allegiance, and so he walked home. And when he walked down the road here, this little road right here, right there, his wife and his child, the people at his farm did not know him because he was so poor, which means he was so poor, thin, thank you, and lice-ridden. They didn't know who he was. So his wife, Jane, took him out to the wash house, boiled his clothes, shaved him clean, in hopes of keeping lice from the entire family. Elijah Calvin came home, and I don't know what it was like when he came home, but I know he did, and I know his wife was a kind and loving grandmother, and of the great-grandmothers, of my papa's great-grandmother, she was his favorite, because she was kind and tender, and we have a photograph of her here, and you can see her smiling. She's got a little smile on her face. Now, Stephen, when he got ready to go to war, he pretty much knew he wasn't going to make it, because the older men did not last long. So he had his likeness made, and he wrote his will, and he left it behind in case I do not survive this war. Well, he didn't. And I've got to tell you one thing about genealogy has taught me. One thing never changes. That's families and the way they do when it comes to a will and dividing up an estate. Because the only reason I know about the will is there was a lawsuit. Heaven bless lawsuits. I love them. You find out lots about families from lawsuits. Is there anything else you want to tell me? Yes, Mom.
Well, I want to know what happened when she went looking for him.
Oh gosh, I forgot that part. Well, see, when I got here today, I had several people tell me what happened to him. They went to Weldon, they did go, and they retrieved his body. Stephen had $25 left on him that went to the adjutant, and someone showed up saying that she was his wife, and her name was Marietta, and she got $25. We have no idea who that is. But Alex Newton and my 3 great-grandmothers loaded the coffin of Stephen Frazier on the back of that wagon and brought it back from Weldon. And I would love to know what road you think they traveled. Because it wasn't like, couldn't have been a 2-day trip. It had to be 3, 4 days. What do you think, Ron?
Yeah, I would think at least 2 days.
Yeah.
Minimum.
And when they crossed Jordan Creek, the coffin floated off the back of the wagon. She and Alex jumped in the river, wrestled it back up onto the wagon, and she and her 8 layers of clothes, which is what a lady would have worn. I'm not wearing 8 layers, folks. No, I'm a loose woman. And that's what it is. When you're not wearing those 8 layers, you're a loose woman. That's what it means. She jumped in, and they got the coffin back up onto the wagon, and they went to I always heard, a Blackwell cousin's house. And they were denied, they wanted to sleep there, let her dry out, and they were denied entrance because they were afraid of contagion, and I don't blame them. And you know, all these years, I've never heard anybody say one word against that family for denying them stay there that night. And you know, if somebody had known something, they'd have said something. And she did get home, and 3 days later, they buried Stephen and Elizabeth Blackwell Frazier on Blackwell's Mountain. And one day, Kitty Humphreys and I and Mildred Goss are going to go up there, and we're going to find those graves. Thank you, Mark.
That was my next question. Do you know where the cemetery is?
We know where the cemetery is. And there are stones that are chiseled out, and you can see the names in them. But I've never been up there. Okay, you want to go to it? Yes, ma'am.
I have a question about the 2 men who came back.
Yes, ma'am.
Do you have any information about the time frame from the time they were actually in battle and the time that they came home? In other words, was it weeks? Was it months?
It was months.
It was months.
Elijah Calvin stayed at Point Lookout from 63 to the end of 64. And that was a hellhole. It was a pen, a fenced-in area on a peninsula on the ocean. There were no buildings for the Confederates, none. There were no provisions for them. How did they survive? They made little things, they carved little things, they traded things, and citizens of the area could pay 10 cents and go and look at them. But it was a horrible place. All prisons were a horrible place. They dug holes, they lived in the ground to stay warm. If they misbehaved, blankets were taken away from them. It was hard. But even with that bad arm, he survived. And he came back into the Richmond area. He came back in the Richmond area carrying a flag of truce. That's how he came back to the Confederate side, and that was in 64, the end of 64. And that comes from Fold 3. Wonderful resource, wonderful resource. Thomas Ben. They were all in and out of the hospital a lot, but he had this gunshot wound, 2 months to heal, and then he fought, and then he got sick. And one time he was in the hospital for dyspepsia. Ulcer? I don't know. I love to figure out what they're in the hospital for. But he did return, and he fought at Spotsylvania Courthouse. And that was the last battle that he was in. The thing that amazes me is these men went back. If I'd had a chance to get out of there, I'd have been gone. But then you have to think about who they were there with. They were there with brothers and cousins and good friends. And you didn't want to desert your buddies. And I think that's the attitude that they foster in the military today, that you think of the men you serve with as brothers, and you're there to take care of them, and you're not going to leave them. And that was real then. In Granville County, we were really rather lucky. I think there was only one battle, and that was there a battle in Granville County? No, okay. There was a hospital, right? Okay. But we didn't have the Sherman raids, and we didn't have any of that. So the men came back to part of their things in place. They had a house. They had a way to start over. It was awful. They were in deep poverty, and you can tell it from looking at these pictures. I have a photograph. It's in my book in there in the library, but it's a picture of Alex Newton and his wife Sarah Eakes Newton, Sarah Amy Eakes, after the war. Before the war, she has jewelry, she has a fine dress, she looks really nice, and whether she borrowed it from the photographer or not, I don't know. Ladies don't ask things like that. But after the war, she, her husband, and their children looked like concentration camp victims. They were all so very thin. But they lived to a ripe old age, and I have, as my mother says, I have Pap's picture at my house. Because nobody wants those big pictures. For God's sakes, if you get those big pictures, don't pop them out of the frame and put somebody's wedding picture in it. If you do, take the picture and give it to a local library or a museum and put on there who it is. If you have photographs at home, and you know who those people are, label those photographs. When I come to visit Oxford, we haven't lived here, Troy, what, 50 years?
Almost.
Almost 50 years. My mother loves to play the name game. Oh, you know so-and-so. That's so-and-so's daughter. That's cousin so-and-so. They married so-and-so. And I go, and she likes to eat at Wendy's or somewhere, and she'll say, well, did you see anybody you know? Well, no, Mom, I know. I didn't see anybody I know. Unless I saw some of these ladies, I didn't see anybody I know. But I love for Betsy to go with us, because Betsy, my sweet sister, will tell me the names of these people. But in my mind, remember, you're 50 years younger, so that's pretty good. I want to thank my sister and my nephew and his girlfriend for being here tonight, and Troy's sister Dolores, and our nephew Daniel for being here, and for Mamie Van, and I think, and Johnny, and Glenn, thank y'all all for being here. I really appreciate it. Ask a question.
Who's your favorite sister?
Okay, how many sisters do I have? Anybody else want to share anything? Yes, sir.
I'd like to ask a question.
Yes, sir.
The character that you portrayed this evening, how much longer did she live after the war?
Not at all. She died in 1863.
She died.
Bringing home
died
Stevens. She died bringing his body home. I talked to somebody at a grocery store, and they said, well, you know, she fell in the creek and she had a heart attack. Heard that story. You know, she took a servant and went. Heard that story. But the thing that amazes me is the kernel of the story has remained the same, and it's fascinated me since I was a little girl. And these letters, and I kept putting together the narrative of what might have been. And every time I give this, it changes a little. And sometimes I make a mistake, and sometimes I do pretty good. But I was very nervous about doing this for you all tonight because I knew y'all would know if I told a lie. Yes, ma'am.
What was her age when she passed?
63.
63? She
No,
was.
well,
She was
she was born in
17.
1803.
She was
born in
60.
1803.
1803. So she was 60. But they called her Old Lady Frazier. They did. Yeah. And when I look in the mirror and I think, I got about 10 years or better. So I guess you'll have to call me Old Lady Johnson, but be ready for a fight.
Tell us who who Alexander S. Newton was and where his role was and why he was there
Well,
on that wagon.
Alex
That dead
Newton
body.
was a man, he was a young man from the community. He was part of Mallett's battalion, and he was in Raleigh. And he worked with the sick in the hospital, and sometimes he drove an ambulance. On his Fold 3 cards, you can see he has furloughs spaced, he had lots of furloughs spaced out. And the really cool thing about it, he's my great-great-grandfather as well. I don't think they knew it at the time, because those people weren't born, but that's also my great-great-grandfather. I have photographs of all of the generations of my family, of everyone, of most of the people that served over here on this board, and the connections. This is my grandmother, Myrtle Parham Frazier, and her mother was Lena Newton Parham. There you go, there's the Newton again.
Lena Van.
Lena Van. Well, the Lena Van, I couldn't get that all on there and get those pictures there too. So. But you're welcome to look at the pictures. Anything else? Yes, ma'am.
How would they transport the body from such a long journey? Was it?
Well, we have a friend who is, he owns a funeral home. And this is one of his things he does. He talks about funeral practices during the Confederacy, during the war. And that's when embalming came into being.
Oh.
And they would, if you had the money, they would embalm the body. Sometimes they would put the body inside a lead coffin and send it back. But was his in lead or wood? I don't know.
Well, that woman got us $25.
I know she did. And I think he probably had more than 25 because he had money. And it was kind of amazing to be able to bring him home. James Spence Frazier is buried in a mass grave at Petersburg. He died there. Elijah Calvin and Thomas Ben are rested nicely in Mountain Creek Cemetery. Along with how many of my great-great-granddaddies, Troy? 3 of them up there?
Yeah. Where's the hospital in Granville County?
Kittrell.
Kittrell.
Yeah, well, being Vance County now, but
Yeah.
There was a battle in Kittrell.
There was a battle?
There was a battle. There's a memorial there. There was a battle. I don't think it's more of a skirmish.
A skirmish.
We don't call it a major battle,
Let me
but
tell
it
you
was a
something funny
skirmish.
about Kittrell.
But people still got
They
shot
would
and
go to
killed.
Kittrell for the springs. You know, it was a vacation place.
Yes.
Well,
And a hotel down there.
and our Yankee neighbors liked to come down too and go hunting, but they wouldn't stay at the same place that the Confederates stayed. They stayed in another place. And this was well before the war. The reasons for the war are so many. Just think about a time capsule of our life right now. And if you had to tell somebody what caused this, it would be hard for you to do that. There was a tax that was levied on just Southerners. 80% of the funding of the federal government came from the South. And then there was that horrible institution. And what was it? Somebody said, it's when you got a tiger by the tail, what do? Do you hang on or do you let go? And that's the way many of them felt about slavery. Granny East. Gosh, what was her husband's name? Was it Spence East?
Spencer.
Spencer East? Well, he married the second time, he married a very young woman. And she said, here I was, a little girl, married to this old man, taking care of his other children and still having children. And one of my favorite things to do as a child was to go up there and sit down and listen to her, and she would teach me how to card cotton. Yeah, and we would make tea cakes and carry them back to her. And she said, I was so glad when they freed those slaves, I thought I would be chained to that spinning wheel and that loom the rest of my life making clothes. Anything else?
It's my understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong.
Oh, I won't correct you, believe me, because it's, go right ahead.
It's, at least for the first 2 years of the war, the guys enlisted, went away for 90 days, sometimes 6 months, and then came back on furlough to tend the crops or whatever.
They would get wheat furloughs and corn furloughs, but after I would say it would be before 62 because they would not have done the Conscription Act if there had been men available to go to war. Because the ranks were getting thin and they were dying quickly of disease. And so that's the reason. Yeah, men got furloughed, they got wounded, they had what they call the quick step from bad sanitation and poor food, and a lot of them died of that. But the 90 days in and out, I don't know about that.
See, a lot of them, what happened was they joined up to be like a local militia. And then all of a sudden, like you're in the National Guard, and also the governor tells you, now you're in something bigger. And then the federal, or if in our case like today, the federal would come along and they would nationalize you, and then you'd be in the real army. You know, they did this just a few years ago. People that were training, all of a sudden they sent them to Iraq back a few years ago, back in Desert Storm and stuff like that. These guys who were just, you know, local guys working out on doing the National Guard.
We have a good friend that's an author, and he's written a book about South Carolina, and he said in the letters that he has from this group of boys, they said, they say they want us to go to Virginia to defend Virginia, but I'm not stepping 1 foot over that South Carolina line. I signed up to defend South Carolina, and that is it. Because the allegiance to a state was much, much stronger than the allegiance to this little nation. And if you ask somebody, where are you from, they would say, I'm a Carolinian. I'm a Virginian.
To point that, you have to look at what Robert E. Lee's letter, if you've ever read. I've read the original, and it's in the museum, in the archives.
When he said
in Richmond, and he said that was the reason he was offered to head the Union Army.
Mm-hmm. Y'all knew that. Yeah.
But he could not turn his back on Virginia, and that's the way most people felt of their own state.
And said, I hope to never take up my sword again, except in defense of my home state of Virginia. See, my husband's a bit of a historian, and he is the registrar for the Sons of the American Revolution, and he's the treasurer for our local SCB. So we sit down and argue out.
But we don't say argue. Don't use that argue. Discussion. They know you wouldn't argue.
I'm a member of the United Daughters of the Confederacy, and I'm a member of the DAR, Daughters of the American Revolution. Also could be members of several others, but how many organizations are you going to pay dues to? I mean, how many hours in the day? That's right. Thank y'all. Yes.
One of the things you were talking about, them just going in and staying a short period of time of signing up. I went to an SCV meeting last month, and they were talking about when the war started, they didn't think the war was going to